Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you today about the role of robotics and neurotechnology in stroke rehabilitation. My name is Gomes da Silva. I work for Hobbs Rehabilitation. I'm a specialist neurological physiotherapist and I lead the Centre for Hobbs Rehabilitation in Bristol. Just a little bit about myself. My background is that I was clinical lead at King's College Hospital before I worked for Hobbs. So I was leading neuro rehabilitation and stroke teams for about 16 years at King's in London. And I moved to Bristol about 5 years ago and set up this service with Hobbs, which has sort of developed into a neurotechnology centre. Just trying to move it forwards. Hang on. No, it's just not. Hang on, I just need to figure out how to get to the next slide. I pressed my forward button, doesn't seem to be moving. Right, that's the next. Have you got the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I've just lost all of you off the screen, so if you smile or wave at me, I won't be able to see you. So I'll definitely take questions at the end. Just one slide, just to say a bit about Hobbs Rehabilitation, who we are, and sort of what the background with Hobbs is. It was a company founded in 2005 by Helen Hobbs and her business partner Nikki Ellis, who are both physiotherapists, passionate in neuro rehabilitation. It's since grown from one small centre in Winchester with the two of them working. We've now got multiple sites across the south of England, as you can see on the map there. The Bristol Centre is the newest and the sort of most tech advanced centre and the most westerly centre. And we've got a full interdisciplinary team across all of the different Hobbs locations, including physio, OT, speech language therapist, neuropsychology, rehab assistants. And we've currently got more than 100 specialist therapists, I think, working for Hobbs. So that's who we are. We also have a really big role in education and training. We're very passionate about education training, particularly in regards to neurotechnology. So as well as running the services, we do a lot of research and conferences, and we're engaged in the sort of clinical application of new technology as it hits the market. All right, back to today. So today my job is to talk to you about the role of robotics and neurotech in stroke rehab. So I'm going to try and cover is a little bit of the background about intensity and neurotechnology. Why do we need to be treating intensively? What can neurotechnology do to help us with that? I'm going to look at the types of robots that are available on the market, and then also a little bit of just research to support this kind of intervention. And I'll try and finish with a case study, which hopefully will be meaningful to some of you if you are stroke survivors yourselves. Okay, so the background is the first section here. So to really understand where this drive has come to, where we talk a lot about intensity now, and a drive has really sort of come for that over the last 15, 20 years, maybe 10 years really, much more than it used to be talked about when I was first qualified. It's important to know what we have been doing and where we've sort of come from and what the landscape looks like and why we've started to talk a little bit about intensity. So you may be aware that the Royal College of Physicians in the UK produces a stroke clinical guideline. You've probably all come across these. The old versions of the guideline initially used to recommend this magic number of 45 minutes of therapy per day. We're not quite sure where this came from. It probably came from a bunch of people sitting in a room who all worked clinically, who did 45 minutes a day. There was never really any evidence base to suggest that 45 minutes per day of therapy was a good number, but it was enshrined within the clinical guidelines from early days of the clinical guidelines, and it's very much been adhered to, and it's kind of cemented in the brains of all therapists working in sort of conventional services. However, that's not that much, as you'll know. In 2016, they updated the guidelines and they broadened that definition to sort of expand it a little bit to say that people with stroke should accumulate at least 45 minutes of each appropriate therapy, to enable them to meet their goals. So there was a recognition that this 45-minute rigid guidance wasn't actually that helpful for people, and wasn't necessarily the right thing either. So it's a little bit more aspirational. However, if we look actually across healthcare, we'll see in reality that stroke therapy is rarely delivered intensively or in high dose. If we look at the audit data from this country, so for those of you who are professionals, you'll know this, but if you're a patient, you may not know this, that stroke services are audited quite heavily across the UK. So if we look at the SNAP data, which is the Stroke Sentinel National Audit Programme. They gather all sorts of data about stroke care right across the pathway, but they also look at the amount of time people spend in therapy, the amount percentage of their time they spend in different therapy environments. So the latest audit in June, between April and June 23, the national average of minutes spent per session in occupational therapy was 40 minutes, physio 35, SLT 30.8. So the reality of this 45 minutes is still largely that a lot of people aren't hitting that number. Some places obviously do a little bit more than that, not many. The lowest one I think in this section of the data was 22.9 minutes of physio. And then if we look at this little bit at the bottom, it shows the amount of patients who received the equivalent of 45 minutes therapy over for each of the 5 days of the week, and that was lower. That was 32% physio, 34 OT, and only 18% speech and language therapy. So although the guidelines started to move upwards and be a bit more aspirational, there is still a problem on the ground with what actually is being delivered. So what is the reality? So there are a couple of studies that have also looked at what's happening on the ground. So in 2015, a little while ago, Hayward et al. Did a study where they looked at what patients were doing in their sessions and with their upper limb in terms of training during their therapy sessions. And they found that out of the session, less than 4 minutes in a physio session was spent on active upper limb training, 11 minutes in an occupational therapy session, so that was a little bit better. But in terms of the number of reps, there was only 32 repetitions per session. That was the maximum that they found. So it was pretty much underdosed. There was a more recent study here by James and McGlinchey. These guys work at St Thomas's in London. This was last year. They looked at how active stroke patients were during their rehabilitation. So by active, they defined when they were patients engaged in a task such as standing, walking, sitting, etc., balancing. The inactive part, excuse me, was defined as anything else in that session. So if we look at that bottom part with the ring on there, out of all the sessions that were planned, the mean session length was 32 minutes, which is less than 45. The mean active exercise time within that session was 15.24 minutes. So of the session, 47% was spent in active engagement of tasks. So we've still got a way to go. So even though there is more aspirational guidance out there on the ground, it's still difficult to actually achieve high intensity therapy in conventional sort of NHS type settings. Why is this not changing? Now my screen is frozen. Right, sorry. Okay. However, there is some hope on the horizon. So those guidelines have been updated again this year, the 2023 stroke guidance, and you'll see on the screen there that's quite a different set of aspirational targets for how much patients should be receiving. So it has gone up to a minimum of 3 hours a day of multidisciplinary therapy, at least 5 days out of 7. And they've also given guidance on the type of intervention and exercises and what people should be doing within those periods of time. So they've, as you can see in all of the statements there, they talk a lot about repetitive intensive exercises. So they're talking about that in terms of weakness. They talk about it in terms of recovery with the upper limb. And then for the first time, really, they've started to recommend robot mediated treatment, and that because it has got the potential to offer increased intensity through repetition as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's a very positive change in the guidelines that we've seen this year. And people have really been listening to this, people like me droning on about intensity and how much you need to do. And things seem to be moving forward. However, looking at the SNAP data, it's still definitely on the ground, nowhere near that level, but at least we have something to aim for, which is exciting and good news. So it's clear that in conventional sort of traditional treatment settings, most stroke patients at the moment simply don't achieve the correct intensity or dose to make meaningful or functional changes. So what do the principles of neuroplasticity tell us about dose and intensity? How do we know what we should be doing? Well, We know that learning in both the healthy and the damaged brain is driven by behavioural, sensory and cognitive experiences. So it's a combination of that environment that enriches the learning environment. It's not purely just task response the whole time. We know that the damaged brain changes the way it responds to learning, but we know it still can learn. And we also know that the damaged brain very quickly is driven to reorganize. And we see this example of this is how quickly after a stroke, you or stroke patients may start to use their unaffected limb, even if it's not their dominant side. That happens very quickly, and the brain very quickly reorganizes and starts to learn new behaviors. So that process can be a positive process, or it can be a negative process, because it can be adaptive or it can be maladaptive. So the trick for us as therapists is to make that process adaptive and positive, resulting in new movement patterns that are helpful to the patient. So this is my one slide about neuroplasticity to try and sort of put it into a nutshell, because we talk a lot about neuroplasticity. This is what we're driving for. This is what we're aiming for with all intensity, robotics, everything that we do in therapy. We're trying to affect neuroplasticity. So this is my summary slide. So bear with me, but I'll just go through the pictures. So these are the main principles of neuroplasticity. So the top corner there, we've got to use it or lose it. So neural circuits in your brain, if they are not engaged in activity, will degrade over time. So for example, I used to be able to play the Mozart clarinet concerto for my grade 8 clarinet exam when I was 18. Well, I won't give away my age, but that was many, 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 many years ago. I cannot any longer play the Mozart clarinet concerto because I haven't picked up a clarinet for the best part of about 20 years. So I've actually lost that skill, so I have not used it. So use it or lose it is the principle there. Conversely, the next picture along says that if you use it, you will improve it. So we know this, if you practice a task, you will improve it. So the monkey experiments show that monkeys trained to take pellets will increase regions of their brain through extended training, and they've shown that on the brain scans. Specificity counts. Learning a specific skill rather than just using your limb to practice movements seems to be required to produce changes in the patterns of neural activity. So you've got to be very task specific about what you're trying to do to make changes. There's the principle of repetition. So repetition of that acquired behavior is required to then induce lasting neural change. So for example, a tennis player there will repeat the same stroke over and over and over again, thousands and thousands of times in training in order to become good at that particular movement. They've repeated it thousands of times a day. So this is where we come to intensity, i.e. how much do we need to do? What do we need to do? How many reps do we need to do? So the literature tells us that for upper limb rehab, we need to be doing 400 repetitions in order to change our neuroplasticity, to drive neuroplasticity changes in the brain. And if we're looking at gait training and walking, it's nearer to sort of 1,000 to 2,000 steps within the session to try and drive the system in order to make those changes and make lasting changes in the brain tissue. Time matters. So when do we do the rehab? That matters. We know that if we do it earlier in the journey after a stroke, the results will be better. It doesn't mean you can't make changes later down the line, but it's easier to do it when your brain is ready for that information and that experience post-stroke. Experience, motivation and attention is really important. Plasticity is driven by cognitive factors as well as physical input. It's not just a physical process. And then there's the concept of transference. So once you start to get change in one set of neural circuits in your brain, that can then promote subsequent plasticity in other circuits. It's a bit of a cascade effect. So the analogy there at the end, my Strictly Come Dancing analogy, I don't know if everyone's watching that at the moment. I have to watch my kids every week. So in that process, there is the culmination of intensive training, task specificity, there is repetition, intensity, motivation. The environment is meaningful and rewarding. And those people who go on the program start off as novices, and often at the end of 10 weeks of training, they come out almost like professional dancers. So that is an example of how training and using those principles can make you make changes within your brain and your motor system. Okay, so We know we've got to aim for intensive rehab through specific skill acquisition, repetitive task practice, and at higher doses than previously thought in order to facilitate neuroplasticity and improve outcomes. So that's where there is an opportunity for robotics and neurotechnology to help us achieve that. So neurotech can help us to achieve repetition and intensity, provides a level of engagement during tasks, gives us motivation and reward through gaming, and it helps with new skill acquisition, but it does not replace the clinician. It is something that we use alongside and in conjunction with our conventional treatment techniques. That's really important, especially me being a therapist. I don't want to talk myself out of the job. So the added value of robotic therapy, it allows us to make improvements in strength. It allows patients to work at a higher intensity than usual. They allow us to work in very specific movement patterns. Some technology is more specific than others. It depends what type you're using. We'll come on to that. And we can achieve high quality movement as well as high dose. And all of those values are evidence-based. And I'll have a brief look at some of the evidence in a minute. So in summary for that section, clinical practice is finally evolving to incorporate technology and robotics. We live in an increasingly technological world. We can't avoid its use anymore, and healthcare has got to acknowledge this and is having to acknowledge this and starting to incorporate technology into different elements of patient care and rehabilitation. But it takes a long time to get evidence into practice, and there is an ongoing cycle of trying to get good scientific evidence together that supports use of technology, and we're still not really where we want to be in this country, but it is starting to change, which is great. So I'm going to just whiz through the types of robotics and technology that can be used in clinical practice. You might have come across various bits. The first one is robots that we call end effectors. So this is robotic technology. This is sort of quite high tech stuff. So the end effector basically means that you are controlling a single point of the limb, usually at the distal means at the end. So it's usually the machine is driving the end of your limb, but the nearer part of your limb too, your more proximal part, still has to move in its normal movement pattern. So it's controlling elements of the movement, but not all of your movement. On the screen there shown are a few different types of end effector robots. The gait trainer, Lexo, we have that in our clinic. That's a robotic gait walking machine. And there's various pieces of upper limb technology there. So they're beneficial to the patient because they give you a little bit of freedom of movement, but with the opportunity to be controlled at one point of your limb to drive that movement forward. They're not suitable for everyone. If you have very, very significant weakness, you might need still a lot of support to get into these kinds of machines or be able to move those sorts of machines, but they are called end effectors, and they are becoming a bit more common in clinical practice now. Then we have got exoskeletons. You probably have heard about exoskeletons, particularly in the spinal cord injury population. So these enable precise control of the limbs and restrict any unwanted movement. So your movement is controlled across multiple joints and in all different planes of movement. So it's a very controlled type of movement. So it's much more supportive and much more specific in a way than the use of an end effector. That comes with pros and cons. The pros are that you can move limbs that you couldn't otherwise move. The cons are that you may not be moving as naturally within that, and the machine is taking more of that role. So they're exoskeletons.
Hands and things. Oh, you're not worried about that?
Sorry, I can't see anyone on my screen, so I'm not sure. If you pop your question in the chat, I think we're going to come back to some questions. I could come back to the screens at the end. So these another type of robots are assistive devices, which are essentially wearable devices which will facilitate performance of functional tasks. So these are essentially what we would call a functional orthosis. So you wear the device, you train to complete a particular task within the device, and the device, you wear it the whole time. You're not necessarily training the movement to be performed without that device, but it's allowing you to do a movement whilst wearing the device. So that would be classed as an assistive device. Then there is sensor-based technology. This is the one that you're most likely to have come across in sort of NHS clinical settings because it's not as expensive as the robotic technology. So Sensor-based technology will use Bluetooth or camera tech to identify where the limb is in space and give you feedback on the screen as to what you're doing. So it's a bit more of a basic form of neurotech, and it builds on what the gaming industry have evolved in the early days with their cameras, such as the Wii system, you might have come across that, or an Xbox Kinect, which has got a complete 360-degree camera view, and they now can capture full body movements with that. And the one on the right here, the white desk, is called Pablo. We have that in our clinic. That's a Bluetooth sensor-based technology that's got sensors that you put on the limb so that it knows where you are in space and it reacts with the screen. And then we have virtual reality and augmented reality. So this is where it gets into a bit of the wacky territory. So virtual reality is a total immersion in a virtual world. So your vision is replaced in a 360-degree plane. You can look all the way around you with the goggles on. It takes you to another world. The real world is replaced with something virtually. Whereas augmented reality, you might have heard a bit more about now, that actually adds additional information and images to your own visual, what we see within your own vision. So this is usually the form of a pair of glasses that overlay on top of your normal vision other images. This is quite a new emerging form of technology. We're actually about to do a clinical trial with a company called Stroll, who've got some augmented reality glasses, and we are going to look at Parkinson's patients, and they can look at through the glasses, they can see cues or stepping cues, for example, on the floor, so they can step over them rather than freezing and shuffling. So we're going to do a clinical trial with them and see how useful they are, or whether there are applications for other patients. That's quite a new sort of area of technology. It's a bit mind-boggling. There's all sorts of different kinds of tech. Just one slide to show you what we've got in our centre at Hobbs. I'm very lucky. As I said, I worked in the NHS for 22 years. I've only been in the world of neurotech, sort of independent practice for the last 5 years. So it's a whole new world to me as well. We're very lucky to have the Tyro solution, which is all the bits pictured in the middle there, big pieces of technology that we have, like robotic technology in the clinic. But we don't only have the Tyro stuff, we have other brands and other companies that we work with. So we're not sort of like trying to sell products and that kind of thing. It's like we just use what works for our patient groups, and we do trials with companies, and they often end up lending us the kit so that we get to use all sorts of different kinds of tech. And there's always so much on the market, so much new stuff coming out all the time. It is quite mind-boggling how much it is going on research-wise. So just a couple of slides about the research, because it is all backed up by research. So this slide just summarises a few different studies that are actually supportive of intensive rehabilitation, but not necessarily all in a robotic form. A lot of them do look at robots, but they're not all. Some of them are just high intensity studies as well. If I just pick out a couple of the studies on this screen. So at the bottom here, this one, Chow Han 2012, they was a small group of researchers looking at, they did a small RCT looking at 40 patients. They didn't use any robotics at all. They looked at different groups doing different amounts of intensity of therapy. They did 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours a day for 5 days a week over 6 weeks. So their maximum intervention group had 90 hours over that 6-week period, which is huge. And the smallest group had 30 hours over that 6-week period. Obviously, they showed the largest improvement in their group C, which was the 90 hours over that period of time, but they equally showed good changes in both of the other groups as well. So they were sort of showing a dose effect, like the more you do, the better the outcome. But then they start to sort of ceiling. When you get to the really super high intervention, it doesn't make that much difference compared to the medium intervention group, for example. But they were advocating high intensity input. And then this other study at the bottom here, McCabe et al. 2015, they looked at a comparison of 3 different kinds of intervention: robotics, FES, which is functional electrical stimulation, and motor learning, which is a normal conventional treatment way of treating physio. And they looked at upper limbs again. They did super high dose. They went 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. 12 weeks of intervention, which is 300 hours, which is a lot of therapy. These were all chronic stroke patients, nobody less than a year. And they did 3 different groups with these 3 different pieces of, 3 different ways of treating. Unsurprisingly, all of their 3 groups showed a large percentage change in their outcome measures because they did high intensity. But that study was important because it shows it's not only what you do, it's not necessarily what you do in that, it's how much you do and how much quality that is. So it doesn't have to be blitz robotics, it doesn't have to be electrical stimulation, it doesn't have to be conventional. You can mix those things up. It's more about how much you're doing with people, sort of supporting the level of intensity. And the last one I'll pick out there is this one at the top, Ward et al. 2018. That's the results from the upper limb programme at Queen Square in London. I don't know if any of you have come across that. That's an intensive upper limb programme that Nick Ward and the team put together and have had commissioned under the NHS, which is amazing. They do 90 hours over 3 weeks of therapy. They do 7.5 hours a day, various different settings. They use conventional treatment, OT, physio, group treatment, bit of tech. They've got some of the robotic tech. They've got some lower level tech. They also showed a lot of change after their 3-week intensive program, but interestingly, that follow-up and 6 months later, they were still showing improvements. So they were carrying on improving in their day-to-day life once they left that program as well. I won't go into all of these because we'll be here all day. Briefly, this is just a slide which shows specific pieces of research related to specific pieces of technology. And again, I'll just pick out a couple that you may have come across. So for example, Grippable is a small handheld device that you can use in conjunction with an iPad to do gaming. It's called exergaming. So there's a couple of studies there, Broderick et al. In 21 and Mace et al. In 2022, both looked at Grippable and did comparison studies with Grippable versus the conventional therapy and looked at how many repetitions they were doing in those respective sessions. And they basically found that people using the devices were doing a lot more repetitions compared with people just doing an exercise program, to the tune of, you know, I think the device was enabled 104 repetitions in the Broderick study per day. Excuse me. Conventional therapy control group really doing 15 repetitions, so it's quite a marked uplift. So there's lots of evidence. I won't go through all the nitty gritty, but just to say that there is plenty of evidence out there for various devices, plenty of evidence to support intensive therapy, and plenty of evidence that supports robotic therapy. And I think that's reflected in that new set of guidelines that's come out this year. Excuse me, I'm just going to drink some water. Okay, so I'm just going to finish with a case study. There's just one patient here, just a very brief case study, just trying to show how we have used technology with this particular patient in clinical practice. So this is Will. So Will was a pilot, so he was a very high functioning independent man, aged 45, working before he had an infarct in his middle cerebral artery. Following that, he had hydrocephalus, which is swelling in the brain. So he ended up having to have what we call a decompressive craniectomy. So he had to have neurosurgery as well. So, and then he had a long period as an inpatient, and then came to us after his inpatient journey, came to Hobbs. Again, he'd had a residential stay with Hobbs and then became an outpatient. So he sort of did a bit of everything. He had severe left-sided weakness, neglect, sensory impairment, cognitive impairment, impairment to his executive function. And by that, I mean the processes that you manage yourself, how you self-regulate, how you form goals, sort of an umbrella term for all of those tasks. So obviously being a pilot and losing your executive function is pretty difficult for him. So, as I said, he had a decompressive craniectomy, which basically removed part of his skull. So you can see on the left side of my screen, you can see just after surgery there, where he's had the bone flap has been taken out and his brain's been allowed to swell up into his head. Once that swelling goes, it tends to leave the opposite problem, where you have a big dip in your head and your brain is sort of exposed for a while. So hence the need to be wearing helmet. So you can see in the middle picture there, he's got a helmet on his head and that's why he's wearing that. He has since had a cranioplasty, which put the skull back in place and gives his head more normal shape. So he's been through a lot. He's had neurosurgery. It's been quite a severe a severe, experience for him. That's a picture of him at home with his boys, as you can see, sort of active dad, busy man, family man. Obviously that all changed when he had his stroke. So when he came to Hobbs, he'd already gone through the acute hospital experience. So by the time he got to us, he was able to mobilise, and he wanted to increase his mobility and improve his gait pattern. So he wanted to be able to walk longer strides, walk in a better way, not have such a strong arm reaction when he walked. He was also really interested in looking at returning to driving, so have some sort of independence. He particularly enjoyed cooking on his barbecue, as you can see from that last picture. That was him in front of his fire pit with the boys. So he wanted to be able to get back to his barbecue and clean the barbecue, so sort of moving his hand across the barbecue to clean it. So that was his job in the house. He also was really keen to be able to open his bottle of water himself, lid and hold the bottle, and then use both of his hands to take a drink. He also wanted to wash, dress independently, cook meals safely independently. So I've just highlighted the first 4 goals there. I'm just going to show you a few pictures in the next slide of how we tried to incorporate those sort of goals with technology. So here is Will in the clinic. So on the right side there, you can see he is in our gait trainer, which is called Lexo, that big hoist that he's in on the right side. So we were working on gait, giving him some partial body weight support, supporting his feet through the end effector of the robot. And that allowed us to control how far he walked, how long his strides were, increase the speed, and gave him a pretty high step count by using the Lexo in the clinic, along with walking on the ground, but that was one of the interventions. On the left side there, you can see us working on his driving goal using some of our technology. So we had his arms there are suspended in a machine that we call Diego, and it's an upper limb suspension anti-gravity robotic machine. So it sort of takes the weight off your limbs. We popped a Pilates ring in front of him there to mock up the driving wheel, and we were working on turning the wheel. He had a screen, that's why he was looking over to that side. You can see his eyes, he's looking at a screen there. So he was playing a game, a driving game, using the technology to help him achieve the movements that he couldn't achieve naturally, to try and increase the repetitions there. And then the other goals, cooking and cleaning on the barbecue was one of his goals. So on the right there, you can see we've got a sort of what looks like a giant iPad, and he was using his hand on a controller to move that around the screen with some facilitation, trying to mock up the movements of how you might, clean a barbecue, basically. So that was him working in standing on that goal. And then on the left side, you can see, again, using Diego technology, but he's this time has got a bottle in his hand with the lid, and we were working on him lifting that bottle and bringing that to his hand. So again, just a very quick overview of the sort of things that we did in the clinic to try and achieve the goals. And I thought I'd just finish off with a couple of little videos. This is where the tech might fail me, but let's give it a try. Can you still see the screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, I'm just going to do that. Can you see that little video?
No, it's still in the your presentation.
Oh, okay, don't worry. All right, okay, I thought that might be the tricky element. Right, hang on a sec. I'm going to just come out of the screen. Now I don't know how to get out of it. That was, anyway, I was just going to show you a little video of him walking, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that because it might be tricky, and I've probably gone way over time anyway.
Okay.
I can't find, I don't know how to get back to the presentation now.
We're still on.
Oh, it's there. Yeah, okay,
yeah.
okay. I'm just going to forward this just to get the last thing. I was going to show you. I don't think it's going to show from that screen, so we'll leave that. I was going to show you a nice little video just of him walking, but he's improved greatly as just a sort of end. And that was the end of my talk anyway. So I will say thank you for listening at that point and ask if you've got any questions.
Thank you very much. I'll just pause the recording.